Hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, you're audible. Good afternoon,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Maybe just to re-echo the message from our moderator today. He indicated that in the meantime, let us register our names in the chat box, our place and as well as our places of work. So please, I have already put my name in there. So kindly help us to know you better by registering your name in the chat and where you're placed or where you're based.
Thank you so much, Edith. That is really important for the East African Learning Collaborative because the kind of relationships we have are more individualistic. Even though we are a network, we tend to try to build a relationship with each one of you that is part of the collaborative. So getting to know you, your workplace, and those that participate in our activities is important for us. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you all for this webinar. I'm excited. Hopefully you're excited too, because our presenters, I was just quickly reading through their profile and the work they are going to present to us, and it was quite amazing to me. And so I look forward to hearing from them, and hopefully you're also excited as I am. By name, Aloysius Nyombi, the coordinator of the East African Agency Social and Gender Norms Collaborative, and I'll take on the role of moderation today afternoon. Let's get into what brought us here. Sorry, at times the technology takes a little long. I love to move a little faster than it allows. Okay. I'll introduce our presenters in a minute. So our agenda is a short one, though exciting. We have had the welcome remarks from myself. We shall then have the webinar presentation from our two presenters, and then it will get back to us, the participants, to have a plenary discussion where we shall ask questions or make additions to what the presenters have provided to us. And then we shall wrap it up at the end of it. Let me take the opportunity to provide a biography, a brief biography about our two presenters today afternoon. Our first presenter goes by the name Paul Bukuluki. He's a professor of social work and medical anthropology at Makerere University School of Social Sciences, Department of Social Work and Social Administration. He's a research director of Agency for All, for the Agency for All project. He's a specialist in the following areas: sexual and reproductive health and rights, gender-based violence, and social norms. I should also add agency. Yeah, that's another area where he specializes in. Yeah. Professor Paul, you're welcome. We look forward to hearing from you in a couple of minutes.
Thank you very much, Aloysius, for your kind words.
Thank you. The other presenter goes by the name Victoria Flavia Namuggala. Victoria is a lecturer at the School of Women and Gender Studies, Makerere University. She's a research fellow at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. She's also a research fellow at the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Study. Her research interests are quite several. One is gender violence, 2 is conflict, 3 is children, youth, and indigenous research. Victoria, you're welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you in a couple of
Alois, yes.
So those are our 2 presenters, and without further delay, I'll share their presentation, and then we go into what brought us here today.
Aloysius, can you share the slides?
Yes, please.
Can you help us to share the slides here?
Yes, I'm going to.
Yes, thank you, Aloysius, for your kind introductory words. And thanks everyone for joining us in this discussion today. I also thank the East African Collaborative for giving us this opportunity to share what we have, but also get to learn from quite a very good audience that we see online. So it's 2 of us, and we're trying to actually interrogate the impact that social norms and collective agency have for young people's conceptualization and the adoption of dignified and fulfilling work. We are focusing on Uganda specifically, so all examples will be drawn from Uganda, but we also appreciate that it can be something that can be general to many other countries. So I want, in the interest of time, I want to invite Paul to start us off with the discussion. Then I'll come back later. Paul, you have the floor.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Victoria Namuggala, my co-presenter, for starting us off. Indeed, I agree with the Dr. Namuggala that social norms are central to our lives, and that social norms drive our behavior, including the meaning we attach to dignified work and fulfilling work, because our definition of work is influenced by the socialization processes we undergo by various socialization agents. So we don't just find ourselves doing work, but we do, for that work to make meaning to us, there are norms at play. So that means that social norms are central to the meaning we attach to work, to the value we derive from work, to what we define as dignified work, and what we define as fulfilling work. But then what are these norms? And Aloysius, I request you to put the slides in slideshow such that they are more visible, if you can. But the question is, what are these norms? Many scholars have attempted to define norms, but generally norms would point to those informal rules that define what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. And this would be relative from one society to another. So they define what is acceptable in a given societal group of people. They do define things that we value because people around us also value those very same issues. These norms don't just exist in a vacuum. They are reinforced by what we might call those people who matter in our lives, those people whose opinion matters to us. And in the language of social norms, we refer to these as reference groups. But those are people who are extremely important to us, that when we are making decisions about what we define as dignified work or undignified work, or what we define as fulfilling work, as younger people, they are people we look up to, people you might call role models, whom we want, and we want them to judge us positively. And when I say judge us positively, that means that social norms are reinforced by positive and negative social sanctions. So if we are there, we are seen to adhere to norms in our given society or group, then we are going to be rewarded. They will say, yeah, you chose the right amount of, or the right type of work. It is very dignified. And that alone soothes our minds to be much more satisfied. So what I'm calling appropriate or inappropriate behavior or acceptable behavior in a given society or setting, reinforced by this, reference group, is also maintained by positive and negative social sanctions. Positive social sanctions are rewards, whereas the negative social sanctions would be punishment or retribution in terms of stigma, discrimination, what we are labeled, and so on and so forth. Next slide. So, in other words, one can argue that social norms regulate our behavior, and they define what is normal or actually what is abnormal behavior. So, these social norms are behavior regulators. So, when it comes to dignified work, again, younger people, what they will define as dignified work or satisfying work is going again to be guided by the regulators of behavior, because work is also a behavior. Employment is a form of behavior or practice too. I think you can see that code trying to fit in. So we adhere to norms in order to be able to belong to either group or society, to be accepted. And we do all sorts of things to be accepted, including probably doing work that might pay us less. But when it is socially acceptable, when it is considered appropriate. Next slide. In that, so just to summarize on norms, that means that social norms are actually beliefs, but these are beliefs about what people believe others do, and we call this descriptive or empirical expectations. So these are things you might be able to walk in a community during a transect walk, and you can be able even to see that people are behaving that way. So what people believe others do and what people believe others approve or disapprove norms. We can call, and the second set of norms, which are more about what people believe others approve or disapprove, are what we call normative expectations or injunctive norms. And there is a reference for you if you want to learn more about this. Next slide. Because we are talking not only about norms, but also about agents, about collective agency, we thought it is very important for us to understand agency, and the way we are approaching agency is to look at agency at the individual level, but also at the collective level, what we are calling collective agency. So agency, and sometimes you might find tensions between individual and collective agency, because there could be cases when collective agency is tending towards norms, and when an individual wants to define themselves, they might be facing social control mechanisms that may be contrary to promoting their individual agency. So, but then individual agency, we conceptualize it more in terms of having that voice as an individual, having the self-efficacy, having that confidence to think through the options available, and you make decisions. But it doesn't stop there. It should also go to the level of translating the goals you are setting as an individual into action. So it is not enough to have self-efficacy. That self-efficacy must be also be accompanied by being able to translate those behavior intentions, those goals you have around dignified employment, for example, into action. So when we talk of agency, it has different elements, including what we prefer to refer to as political consciousness, meaning that first of all, you must perceive yourself to have dignified life, to be a person of dignity, a person of worth, have the self-esteem, be able to understand your state in which you are, and that these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, these are the enablers around me, these are the barriers. So political consciousness is extremely important. And when you move from political consciousness, then you might be able to move to a level of self-efficacy, to think, to be able to say, I have the confidence to weigh the different options, to make decisions, and I'm able to assess the enablers of my ability to exercise agency vis-a-vis the barriers and navigate this as I translate my set goals into action. However, also to note that the agency is nested within the empowerment process. So empowerment is a much broader concept because it is a process by which individuals expand their aspirations, goals, gain autonomy to achieve their goals. But here with agency, we look at it as the capacity to make purposeful choices, and then being able to take into consideration the external factors, the opportunity structures, the enablers and barriers within an individual's pursuit of their interests or goals. So that is very important. So agency is a crucial component of the empowerment process. Next slide. And as we conceptualize agency, like I said earlier, voice is extremely important. Having that freedom also to move, and this is a freedom of movement would be important, especially if we consider aspects around gender norms or relationships between men and women, because it might be that a certain gender, and most importantly, women and girls, might be restricted in terms of movement. And that can be an issue when it comes to agency. Behavior control and decision making, especially the ability to make decisions if you're an adolescent or a younger person without adult supervision or approval becomes important. And this is where the nexus between the norms and agency comes in. You are trying to exercise your decision making, your voice, but then there are norms restricting you, for example, to do that. And you having agency is also being able to negotiate with those social norms in order to achieve your goals. So just to summarize, in terms of agency, the aspects of the will to act. So this inner drive that propels you as an individual, and in this case, a younger person, to initiate action is extremely important. And to do that, you must have the feel that you have dignity, you have the self-worth to think through options to initiate action. Then having that capacity to act, because it is one thing to think through your situation and to think that you will be able to take action, but having the practical ability, skills, and resources required to translate your intentions into action is very, very important. And then beyond that, the choice to act, the conscious decision-making that guides not only your intentions, but also translating those intentions into action is also extremely important as we think about agency. Next slide. And if you can go back slightly, I want to speak just a little bit about the difference between individual and collective agency. So collective agency here, again, we aren't simply talking about, there is a slide which had agency and had plural self. So collective agency would be now, happens in different ways. It could happen organically and informally, whereas people who have who are faced by similar challenges, you come together organically to set goals and act upon those goals. But it gets more complicated, especially in the global south. Let's say in Africa and in Uganda, if we speak about the East Africa, for example, where people may not, even when they are individuals, they don't feel like they are just an individual. They feel that they define themselves as a group or a community more than an individual. When you go to the Western, more Cartesian thinking, an individual may define themselves as an individual. But here, in the settings in Africa, we tend to define ourselves in terms of the collective, in terms of the group. So I might be Paul or I might be Victoria, but actually I have plural self because the group and the community is much more important than the individual. So then that is why sometimes we do find the tension between individual agency and collective agency. So this is going to be very important as we move along. How does a person who has plural self, I'm an individual, but then I'm not an individual actually, because I define myself by looking at myself as belonging to a group. My identity is not so much of individual, but it is defined by the belonging I have to a group or the community. Not that I don't exist as an individual, but actually my individuality is reflected through the Ubuntu, through belonging to a group or even a community. So we will be looking at that as we move along. Yeah, over to Victoria to take us on. Let's go to the methodology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was really elaborate, and I think you've laid a very good foundation for me to just pick it up from there. So in doing this research, we used a methodology that's really mixed. We used both qualitative and quantitative approaches to understand how young people in Uganda specifically were positioning themselves in relation to dignified and fulfilling work. So to achieve that, we had to do a desk review. So we reviewed relevant literature that speaks to work, that speaks to dignified and fulfilling work, that speaks to decent work, that speaks to young people. Who is even a young person? It's something that was actually tricky to define. Then we also worked with stakeholders through the Utafiti Sera model. So this model is a Swahili phrase actually that means research policy. And through this model, you engage with different categories of people, different categories of stakeholders to give their views. So they frame the problem, they frame the methods, they frame the approach that their research takes. Then they also comment, they influence the analysis of the research, the findings that we come up with. So in that model, we used qualitative methods, but also quantitative methods. So it was really a comprehensive methodological approach. And it was largely anchored in a feminist epistemological framework. So we're drawing ourselves largely more from a feminist approach, try to understand and make sense of how young people deal with their decisions and conceptualizations relating to work. Next slide, please. Yes, so in this research, we found out that social norms actually impose a sense of collectivization. And in here, young people tend to look at themselves more as belonging and identifying with groups and less of themselves as individuals. So they really respect what society expects them to do and to be, but also the rewards that come with that kind of a position that they take in society. So realize that this kind of construction was gendered. It was gendered, and then it was laying out what's appropriate, for instance, for young women and what's appropriate for young men to do. For instance, for young women, it was expected that they're supposed to sustain marriages and then also contribute towards childbirth. So if one failed to achieve that, it was something that actually affected who they are. So as one was choosing the kind of work to take on, they had to consider, is my marriage safe? Is my marriage, will it be sustained as I take on the kind of job maybe I'm offered, or the kind of job that I have? So these decisions were laying back to what society has already defined for them as what's fit. So the social norms actually were influencing how they decide what to do, when, and even how. So because of this, there was that kind of collective share of, I would say, blame. For instance, if a young woman didn't behave as married women are expected to behave, so she would lose that sense of identity and belonging to that category of women who are considered the married women. It was directly opposite for many of the young men. Many were expected, society expected them to work away from home. It's okay. If you're a young man and you found a job, whether abroad or in town, and you're from the rural setting, it's okay. You can leave home and you go work, because the social expectation is that you're going to provide for your family, your inner nuclear family, but also your larger family. So men were supported to also take on leadership roles and also network. You can't be a man and you just sit home doing nothing. When are you going to network with other men? When are you going to know what's happening in the community? So they are being encouraged. And by doing that, it opens up opportunities for them. They can easily interact and get to know where the job opportunities are. They attain the skills, they get the information, which was really important in them deciding what they can do. If you have options, you can actually decide. But if you don't, it becomes very complicated. Next slide, please. So this is one example. This is a direct quote from one of the female participants. While we emphasize education as a key to empowerment and success and, breakthroughs, this is what she had to say. Yeah, education is good, but you see, for us women, anything is possible. We're supposed to marry. My dream is to meet and marry a rich man. It doesn't matter whether I'm educated or not. I just have to be lucky. So what girls do what girls do is position themselves well, and locally it's termed as okwetega, to tap into the available opportunities. So they position themselves right to meet the right men who are also expected to be rich. Being right includes being rich. So for them, as much as we promote education and talk about it as an empowering tool, the social norm draws back to objectifying themselves as marriage material and also positioning their success in relation to men instead of themselves as individuals. Next, Aloysius. Yeah, so in trying to understand dignified and fulfilling work, we conventionally understand dignified and fulfilling work as relational concepts. They move together, like, one and the other, dignified and fulfilling work. It's very hard to find people talk about dignified work separately from fulfilling work. But for our participants, they broke these two into two separate things. And so for them, dignified work is work that earns respect from society. It can be a professional job, it can even earn less, but you're positioned well, like religious leaders. They look at them as respected, and the community values what they offer. So this is dignified work. So also such work is expected to be safe. And if you're okay, you're safe, you feel comfortable, you feel secure at the work you're doing, then it's termed dignified work. There's job security. For instance, social security is availed. I mean, if you lost your job, you can have that. If you retire, you can still sustain yourself through the social security. It also looks at the social networks that you develop as you're working. So what came out was that dignified work is kind of collectivized work. It ceases to be something that matters to you and as an individual, but then it becomes something important to beyond yourself. So it goes into the pro self, but also the way society has organized itself. Yeah, that's a quote from the Pope, where he says, we do not get dignity from power, money, or culture. We get dignity from work. Then it takes us back to try to understand what is work. When is work meaningful to an individual? And when is it meaningful actually to the community and society that this individual serves? So in that aspect, women try to fit into what society has defined as dignified for them. So here we have a case of women trying to justify why self-employment is the way to go for young women. They argue that because business does not have strict public expectations, you can somehow run things at your own pace. So women can make money and then at the same time manage their homes. So you see the issue of home management, marriage, and family still comes out as a key issue. So we're asking, I mean, the question was, if you're to get any kind of job, what type of job would you go for? And they're saying, I would go for self-employment. I can report anytime I want. I can leave when I want. When my baby is sick, I may choose to report or not, because you're managing your own self. So that backs up what it means to have it dignified. So yeah, it's okay. When you don't comply to what is expected, then you get sanctioned, like Prof has already, explained. These sanctions mean you can actually use your sense of identity and belonging. You can get isolated. You pay the consequences for doing what is not expected of you. So in the next slide, it shows an example of a young man who tried during the post-COVID, but when people are still struggling, tried to make a living doing something that's expected to be done by women. So he says, during the COVID season, and things were really tight, I started working in a restaurant, but it wasn't easy, and I ended up quitting. People would laugh at me and make fun of me for doing feminine roles. They asked embarrassing questions like, which man does that? Are you a woman? So what do women do? So you see this person trying so hard to survive amidst a challenging situation, but society still pulls them back to what social norms demand. What are you supposed to do as a young man? You're supposed to be energetic. You're supposed to be masculine. You're supposed to do energetic things. How dare you work in a restaurant? So what do women do? So this binary construction keeps going on, even amidst challenges. So you see, he gave up. Others, he was being ridiculed for doing the kind of job. Yes, when you go to fulfilling work, like I already explained, a fulfilling work is more of an individual approach to actually work. It's more individualized compared to dignified work, according to our participants. So this one is expected to attend to individual desires and also give individual satisfaction. Because it's individualized, it ends up being non-compliant to the social expectations. As much as society sets the limits and the expectations of what one should do, when, how, those individuals that are non-compliant, they're they diverge, they do things differently. And these in most cases were looked at as problem cases in society. And it not only affect them as individuals for making individual choices, it also go back to their families and also relatives that are close to them and the community where they've raised. Questions like, where did that one grow from? How were they trained? How were they socialized? Kept coming up. So you see, even when you're an individual deciding to do something as yourself, it keeps going back to the social, to the kind of bigger, the broader approach that looks at society. Yeah, so this one is on the side is just a description of how this can play out. The skills that one puts in, the interests, I can prioritize my own interests and the values that I attach. In most cases, many of the participants were tagging back the value to religion and culture and all this. So for them to take on more individual approaches, they had to detach themselves from this kind of values that they hold in society. Yes, next slide. So in the next one, it's an example of a young woman who was bold enough to make this statement. She says, some people think it's the bad girls that go for prostitution. That's what they think. But how can one get fulfilled if they have no income, no job? Out of the desire, one opts for prostitution due to lack of options. Prostitutes are not bad people as such. It is just an income generating activity, hence satisfying. So you see, for her as an individual, she's satisfied because she's earning. And for her, work is intended to give you an income. So how would you be satisfied when you're not earning? But you can ably see the kind of work that satisfies her is not dignified in society. That's what she talks about, what people think. So then it becomes important what people's expectations are of the decisions we make as individuals. Next slide. Yes. So we're trying to draw some conclusions here. And we're saying collective agency, working with social norms, impacts how young people make decisions concerning work. Many young people disregard their aspirations, their individual aspirations and desires, so that they can comply with socially recommended notions of work. It's thus important that we understand people's perceptions and that it demands an integration of the different forms of collective agency and how these are influenced by the social norms. Yes, I tried to run through in the interest of time. I hope we can have some minutes for discussion. And in the next slide, we just say thank you for taking time to join us today. Back to you, Aloysius.
Thank you so much, Dr. Namuggala. Thank you so much, Professor Paul. It's quite, when I hear from you, I really want to read the full report to really understand what these young people define as dignified work and how this intersects with our own definitions of dignity, of work, etc. The voice from the field, from that girl from Zimbabwe, is quite touching, but also revealing. So there are a couple of things that I'm learning, especially the difference between individual and collective agency. It's also important, and it's critical for our work as persons into social behavior change. We shall open up the floor to the participants. If you have a question, you could raise up your hand, but you could also write the question within the chat. See, so that. Is there someone with a question, a comment?
Aloysius, there are some questions in the chat.
Oh, okay.
One of you might want to read out those, or if we can invite people who wrote in the chat to speak out about those comments in the chat.
Yeah, for example, Ramadan has asked that if the social expectation that staying or working near my husband will increase likelihood of a stable relationship, is this harmful or helpful? And why? So it's a question, I think, which requires us to, to discuss a bit more and reflect a bit more on this. And I've seen Dr. Bukuluki attempted to respond, but maybe we can have a discussion about this. So is the social expectation that staying or working near my husband will increase likelihood of a stable relationship? Is it harmful or helpful, and why?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is really interesting. Thank you very much, Ramadan. I think again, you can see that this is already playing out according to norms, whereby you are talking of staying near a husband. That means that that thinking is not just coming out of the virgin. It is embedded in norms that a relationship would be stronger if the couple stays together, and the person who has to sacrifice to either not work or to live nearby would be the wife, according to the norms around here. So, and that already first brings a number of dilemmas in terms of exercising agency. So maybe this younger woman has exercised, the wife of Ramadan is exercising agency, and she has the qualifications, and she gets work. But this work is well-paying, it fits with her career, but it is in Karamoja, and yet Ramadan is living in Kampala. So this brings a dilemma of how does she now exercise her agency? And then she might also think, what are my peers going to think about me who are in my reference group if I leave my husband in Kampala and I go to Karamoja to work in Karamoja? Will I be blamed for my marriage failing? And then is the responsibility to maintain a marriage, does it follow on the woman? So all these issues are rooted in norms, and they affect our decisions for actual agency. Over.
Thank you, Professor Paul. We have a hand, and Dr. Daphne Agaba. Could you?
No, my hand is not up. I don't know what's happening with my computer.
Okay.
It's opening on 2 different pages. Ignore that. Sorry.
Okay. But there is a question in the chat. Okay, so there is a question from Kimong Evelyn. She says, the question of norms is very sensitive. How can one work to undo these social norms and still remain accepted in the same community that upholds it?
That is a very serious question. Is it Evelyn, from Evelyn?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, Evelyn. This question is very fundamental to social norm change, but also to the ethics of social norm change. So this means that if we are promoting social norm change, we have to know that norms exist and they are strong, and they might also even attract severe social sanctions. So in terms of the ethical dilemma we face that we have to address is that how do we make sure that if we are promoting social norm change for women to be able, for example, to exercise their agency, to go after their career dreams, to do dignified, to do work that is satisfying, how do we make sure that we factor in backlash within our social norm change programs and have strategies to counter backlash? How do we make sure that we build that as we work with the individual, we are also working with the reference group such that we build a support environment around this younger woman who is an adopter of the new norms that foster her into her dreams of exercising individual agency, even if it is collective agency. What about this group of younger women who are trying to pursue their careers? They set these goals and they want to translate them into action, but then the social control mechanisms and the norms are not allowing them. So we have to ensure that in our social norm change strategies, to do social norm change ethically, we factor in backlash and how to deal with backlash as people try out new norms. Over.
Yes, Paul, thank you. I also want to add something little, that also appreciating that it's a gradual process, because social norms have been with us for all the time. Now you're trying to change something and you want to see change overnight or maybe in 2 years. It's something that's going to take time, but it has to be something that works beyond an individual. You cannot target an individual. Oh, for you as an individual, you cannot make the change that needs to be seen unless we work collectively. So that means we have to work with, like rightly you pointed out, with the reference groups. We have to change the attitudes of many people around us, people that matter around us. If you're to make a decision to marry, even things like marrying someone from a different religion, these things bring serious trouble within families and communities. Even marrying someone from a different tribe, these are because people believe certain things around life that just needs to be triggered a little to change. So if people see change, more especially positive change coming out of change in social norms, it can help, but it's a gradual. I just want to emphasize it's a gradual process. Yes, thank you. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Vicky. Indeed, it's a gradual process to achieve social norm change. We have a hand, Dr. Amon Ashaba.
Yes, thank you so much, Prof. Thank you, Dr. Victoria, for this candid presentation. I have a comment which ends with a question. And my comment is really on how you have unpacked the concepts at the beginning, providing a detailed understanding of things that we at times throw around without much context and depth. You've opened up the concept of agency, you've looked at collective and individual, you've gone to look at voice, you have looked at norms and opened it up also towards looking at rewards and sanctions and looking at how they are enforced. But I wanted to ask, especially Professor Bukuluki, on the question of backlash, have you conceptualized this? Have you opened it up the way, I mean, you may not be doing it in this particular study, but in your work on social norms, have you deliberately engaged with the notion of backlash? Do we know what it is? Do we know when it manifests? Do we know the nature it takes? Especially given that, you know, as norms change, some people are likely to be sanctioned negatively. So are the negative sanctions what we are conceiving as backlash, or does backlash play out in a different way? I'm doing this because I have been in Eastern Uganda, not so much East, but in Usoga sub-region. And I was looking at women increasingly getting into formal paid employment and also getting into earning incomes. And as they did that through a number of programs of women's empowerment, you get to see men withdrawing from household responsibility. They are no longer providing. They are not looking after the children. They're sort of withdrawing as the others are engaging. And so I've been caught in between perceiving it as backlash against women's progress. But at the same time, I'm looking at men who are clinging to the social sanctions of, who is supposed to be where and who is supposed to be doing what gender role in their household. So have you conceptualized backlash in the context of social norms work?
Wow.
Professor Paul, the floor is yours.
Yes, Dr. Amone Shaba Mwine, this is a very well thought through question that you really ask. And I want to thank you, of course, for also sharing your experience in Busoga, because that has also given us a very concrete example. Because we can only talk about norms when we have a behavior of interest in mind. And one of the common mistakes people do is actually to speak about norms without making reference to a concrete example of the behavior. And you have helped us to position backlash with a very specific example. So yes, when you deal with social sanctions, when you appreciate that there are social sanctions, and say you are starting a program about dignified work or about women economic empowerment, and you, in your study, you don't only look at norms, but you also think through the social sanctions that come with non-adherence to those norms. You are already beginning to think through what the sources of backlash are going to be. And if you begin to think through reference groups, you're already pointing to people who are likely to reinforce the social sanctions, and backlash is actually putting the negative social sanctions in action by these groups who have influence on an individual whom the individual considers to be very important in their life. And using the example of the Busoga, where women go into formal employment and men react by enjoying what one might call patriarchal dividend, where they say, oh, now the women are working, so let us step back. Let us sort of, for lack of better words, let them now take over the responsibilities we were doing. That is actually in a way of exercising backlash, in a way to say, oh, if you go to work, here are the sanctions. I'm going to step back and you take over the responsibilities. And the reason this happens is because we might implement programs that are empowering women, but without integrating gender transformative programming in that would hope to shift the norms that the men who are important in this relationship and the important people around the men believe in. So what this calls for is integrating economic empowerment programs targeting women with gender transformative programming. But what I've observed in my work around the norms is that either most programs or projects gender blind or gender neutral and rarely gender transformative. And that might explain why we have this backlash. So positive things happen, but then the ground and context is not changing to be able to support the women to get into paid employment. Thank you, Dr. Agaba. This is very helpful.
Thank you, Prof. That's quite insightful. We have a couple of questions, and I know the discussion could go on for so many hours, but we have a few minutes to go. And I know Dr. Amon could have a few other questions, but we could always meet on the sites to really deal with those additional questions. But there are quite a few questions in the chat, and I'll read them out, and then we shall have a response from the presenters, and then we shall conclude with this webinar. The first question is, what is the best way to deal with the invisible walls to sustain behavior change? I think some of the responses speak to that, but you could as well talk about that. How does the digital age and social media impact the development of collective agency? And that's a question from Richard. that's a critical one, given that now we are in this digital age, and so many people are being socialized through the digital media. Yes, those are the two questions. If we can handle those, and then that will be.
Yeah, Victoria, do you want to take on some of those ones? Dr. Namuggala? Okay. Whenever she comes up, she can take on some, but I wanted to take on the issue of invisible, you call them invisible walls?
Yes, the invisible walls. Let me. What is the best way to deal with the invisible walls to sustain positive behavior change? It's a question from Ronald Senfuka.
Yeah, so some norms, especially injunctive norms, may be invisible. They are social expectations. They are not written anywhere. Yet, the issue we said, what others believe is appropriate or what others approve is extremely important. I think the way to deal with the invisible walls is, first of all, to know what they are. So once we learn about the injunctive norms, which are about what others believe, others approve or disapprove of. For example, we have this concept of pluralistic ignorance, meaning that people could even, the norms could even have changed, could have shifted, but people don't know, but people are not aware. Maybe it is no longer acceptable to do certain things, but people are not aware of that. So they still keep believing in the norms that might even have changed because they are invisible. But when we do a study and it demonstrates that the norms have started to shift, then people might benefit from that. But the beginning point of addressing the invisible walls is to know what they are and then to program around the invisible walls to change those. Thank you. Over.
Thank you so much, Professor Paul. Dr. Namuggala, are you on now? Okay, there are quite a number of questions in the chat, but I recognize that our time is, we have a few minutes to go, 1 or 2 minutes to go. And from what I'm observing is that we need this discussion to go on. And I could be speaking for many of us here, but I think we need to have another webinar on this particular topic and start with the questions that are within the chat, so that we further have a deeper discussion around issues of agency and collective agency and social norms. Yeah. As the East African Learning Collaborative, we are truly honored to have you today afternoon for this particular webinar. I want to thank Professor Paul Bukuluki. I want to thank Dr. Victoria Namuggala for their time, for their wisdom, for their willingness to share what they know with us. Our key goal is to see that we share what is known around concepts of agency, social norms, and gender norms. Yes, those are the key ones. And when we get this chance to have such conversations, we really appreciate the participants, but also the persons that take part in the discussion. As the East African Learning Collaborative, we shall continue to hold such conversations, and we always want to hear from you, because the topics that we speak, that we present about, that are presented during our webinar come from you, our participants. So if you have any topic that you want us to address, kindly reach out to us through email, we shall share that. But also, we have seen so many people from Ethiopia, and we are really glad that you're part of us. I think it's the first time that we have more than 3 persons from Ethiopia. Salutations to you all, not to say that other participants from other countries are not welcome, but we are really glad that our collaborative is gaining ground within Ethiopia. So on that note, in the chat, I've put a link for the new members that are not part of the ELC. If you're interested in being part of such conversations, kindly follow the link in the chat and join us, be part of our member list. Being a member of the ELC has so many benefits, including what we have had today. Other than that, I want to thank you all once again. I want to thank the presenters, and I want to thank you, the participants who have made this more of a discussion. And I want to promise that we shall have more of these discussions. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the other webinar, which shall be on the last Wednesday of June.
Thank you very
all.
much, Aloysius. Thank you, team. Thank you.
And just to
participants.
say, I will share the PowerPoint presentation.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.